Okay, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the first of the two social institutions, which we can examine to discuss how it affects our life chances, and that is education. So, if we take a look here, we're talking about inequality and education. And again, education is a social institution. Again, it's considered one of the things that is vital to the performance and continuation of a society, in that it is a system by which knowledge and skills are transferred from one generation to another. So without education, a society would not be able to continue, right? We need to pass on knowledge and skills. And America was one of the first nations of the world to actually implement a guaranteed right to education by funding public schools through taxes. Okay? Before that, in Europe and many other places around the world, education was solely based on whether or not you could afford it. If you couldn't, you didn't go. Right? America and its founding fathers said, part of what public taxes need to go to are schools, so that everyone has the opportunity to get an education, which is great. However, that is not specifically stated in the Constitution of the United States. So, whereas we see things like, the Bill of Rights guarantees fundamental rights that we say are quote unquote, God-given human rights, it does not specifically include education. So, whereas the United States said we're going to establish policies where taxes are used to pay for education, that is largely left up to the states to determine their policies regarding education. So we definitely already see inequalities depending on what state you live in the United States. And that is also intersected with other types of things where states develop policies, even in relation to race and education. In 1956, the state of Alabama closed its public schools rather than allow them to be integrated during the push to end the segregation of schools along racial lines. And again, the U.S. Supreme Court had to come in and say you're not allowed to do that. But for a period of time, Alabama said, if you're going to tell us that our schools have to be integrated, we'll just close every school in the state and not allow for it. So we definitely know that there's already a level of inequality just based on the fact that we don't have necessarily a nationally guaranteed right to education on the level of the Constitution. Which leads us to say, okay, well, how do we feel about education in our society? And that we call the popular construction, right? So when we think about education in our society, when we take a look at what education means, what is it that we commonly believe? Again, hegemony. What is it that's commonly handed down to us? What do we commonly think? What is the social definition of what education is to our society? And we definitely know that we regard education as the key to social advancement. I mean, that's said all the time, and it's been pretty much presented to us from a very early age. If you want to succeed in our society, get an education, right? Regardless of what background you are, what social class you are, that's that idea. If you want to be successful in America, get an education, right? And with this idea that if you get an education, no matter who or where you come from or what background you have, you will be successful. So it starts with that concept of everybody needs to go to school, which we have compulsory education in the United States as well. Times that you have to attend school from basically kindergarten up and through, with exceptions, high school. So how are these public schools funded? Well, most of you, especially those of you who are homeowners, know specifically and firsthand knowledge that schools are funded through local taxes, largely homeowner taxes. So again, depending on what area of the country you live in and the affluence or social standing of the environment you live in, there's already going to be differences. Some specific examples in the city of New York, largest city in the United States. So we've got the difference between inner city schools, suburban schools, and then what we even might call more affluent, wealthy suburban areas outside of New York City. Inside the city of New York, public school system, based on the taxes collected for revenue and the number of people who live there, New York City public schools spend about $8,000 a year per student for education. If you move into the typical New York suburb, again, not even necessarily like the really rich ones, but the typical New York City suburb, again, two issues. You're going to have a higher rate of home ownership and single family home ownership. Again, when property taxes are collected, they're collected on a property. So again, if you're thinking about an urban place like New York, an apartment building, which might house 20 or 40 or more families, is paying one property tax, right? Whereas you move out to the suburbs, one property tax is largely probably being paid by a property that's owned or lived in by one family. So you have that. In the typical New York City suburb, it rises from $8,000 to about $12,000 per student. A pretty significant raise, right, in the amount spent. So just going from the city to the suburbs, you're already seeing a very significant raise in the amount of money spent per student per year in public schools. And then if you go to a wealthy New York City suburb, again, where the property values are higher, people are paying more taxes and probably less overall population going to those schools, you're talking about $18,000 per student per year. Okay, so inner city 8,000, suburbs 12,000, wealthy suburbs 18,000, more than double. Okay, so we definitely know that the ways that public schools are funded is very unequal. Again, while we're very concerned as a society that schools are preparing our students well, it is much more likely that you'll find that schools in suburban or more affluent areas are much more concerned with preparing students for college rather than what you might see in a less affluent, sometimes very rural or inner city schools, which are just to get them through, quote unquote, the compulsory time, just to get them to graduation, right? Definitely, we sometimes hear about these debates about what are the solutions to some of this, and we often hear about charter schools, this concept of, okay, well, we can have schools that are private but can access public funds. Again, the debate rages on, but many studies have shown charter schools to be pretty much of the same quality or even slightly behind public schools. The students who apply to charter schools are often then kind of hand selected or picked, again, creating this method of competition among students and families of students. And the schools can pick who they want and who they don't. And then students who aren't picked, again, their only fallback is the public schools, which, because charter schools are now accessing that money, that public money that should be going to public schools suffer because now they've got, quote unquote, let's say, less qualified students that they also have less money to educate. So again, the argument against charter schools is sometimes that they just seem to be, instead of a solution, they seem to be making some of the inequalities in the education system more pronounced. We've definitely talked about this idea of school vouchers is another big thing, this idea that parents are, quote unquote, given a ticket or a coupon, and then they can spend those coupons at private schools or parochial schools, again, religious-based schools. And then again, now we get into the distinctions, sometimes legal distinctions, between public and private education. Can these vouchers be spent at something, let's say, like a parochial school? The most common parochial schools in the United States are generally Catholic schools, right? So if you live in a neighborhood in which the local high school, is proposing a voucher system, would you then be able to take that public money and spend it at a private parochial school? So again, these are the debates that go on when we talk about possible solutions to these things. So a lot of these are the popular constructions, this concept, again, of education is the key to advancement in our society. And some of the things that we've just talked about and will continue to talk about actually point out then some of the critical constructionist arguments that, again, looking at things from a critical constructionist point of view, is who benefits from these things. And we clearly know that The wealthy and elite in our society benefit more from the government programs regarding public education than do the lower classes in our society. So the critical constructionism argument is this kind of notion of, you know, is everybody given access to the same levels of education based on things like social class? And the answer clearly is challenging that notion. So again, this brings us to this question. This is probably a really unusual question for a college professor to be asking in a college class to college students. You know, basically, is college worth it in our society? And again, I hope, you know, you're looking at that saying, I hope I know what he's going to say, and we'll see. Again, we hear about this concept of student loan debt all the time. Again, speaking personally as a person in his midlife who is still paying off college loans, yeah, college loans are a big problem. We in 2012, the average college student left with about $30,000 in debt, and at that time in our society, about a little over a decade ago, when this was taken, had very hard time finding employment that would allow them to make substantial payments on that. So we definitely know that college debt is a big issue, and it's chasing a lot of people away from this kind of popular construction of you need a college education to advance in our society. We also sometimes hear about the college dropout success stories. So we hear about people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and we look around at other types of celebrities who were very popular and wealthy, and they never went to college, so why do I need to go to college? So we definitely have notions about this challenge, this idea of is college worth it? And again, sociologists want to understand, this concept of, why are people paying for this education if, quote unquote, it may or may not be worth it? We definitely know that tuition rates continue to go up while, as we've discussed before in this class, median household family incomes have gone down. So more expensive and less money to pay for it. So we definitely know that that's an issue. However, when we take a look at the salaries of people who have achieved college educations as opposed to the salaries or wages of people who haven't, we see a marked distinction, right? Again, back to 2012. People in our society with a bachelor's degree, the average salary was a little over $1,000 a week. Okay, so about $52,000 a year. Whereas people with a high school diploma was about $650 a week. So again, about 35% less than the average college education. So it appears, based on that information, that we're back to this idea of, yes, if you have a college education, you are definitely much more likely to have a higher salary in our society. So good news, right? However, when we think about this in perspective, again, we're back to that popular construction. If you have a college education in our society, the sky is the limit. If you go on and get an education, you can do anything you want. And this popular construction was education was the key to advancement in our society. We can kind of say the value of a college education, and again, strange thing for a college professor to be saying, it is the value of the college degree in our modern society may or may not be going up, but the penalty for not having a college education is definitely more dramatic. So in a sense, again, this is not a fun thing for me to say, is yes, should you get a college education? Not necessarily because it's automatically going to open the gates and let you do whatever you want in society, but with a college education, you are much less likely to live at or below the poverty line in our society. Okay, again, as we defined in an earlier lecture. So the college costs definitely are more exaggerated in modern society, but the costs of not having a degree are definitely more significant. We can also talk a lot about, again, from a critical constructionist point of view, right? this idea of modern education. Um, One of the things we often talk about is, again, this idea of what does how do modern institutions work or operate. They're definitely thought of as institutions of critical thinking, and again, sociology is one of those disciplines that definitely stresses this concept of teaching students how to think in a society, which again is a very important part of education. However, there's definitely been a big push in our society today to encourage what we sometimes call STEM, right? STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And again, these are not bad things, right? As many employers are saying, we need more qualified people to, work machinery and develop programming and do all the things that STEM education involves. But again, the argument in education is, yeah, you can teach people how to work computers and machines and do all that stuff, but are you teaching them to think critically for themselves, which is much more of a liberal arts background or education? Again, sociology is often included in that, that we sometimes say, uh, you know, uh, there's this argument back and forth about how necessary is what we call liberal education or critical thinking to the education process, as opposed to just producing valuable workers. So, again, all these things together point to how the social institution of education contributes to inequality in our society.